Hey, welcome back to Common Sense OT Security. CISA has recently published OT asset inventory guidance for owners and operators, and certainly we are going to check it out. You will be easily able to find the document on the internet if you just type in this title, Foundations for OT Cybersecurity, Asset Inventory Guidance for Owners and Operators. So if you download the document, it looks like this. And what we see right away, well, there is an impressive roster of additional logos from other esteemed organizations, such as the German BSI and so many others. So apparently this is like a multinational effort. And some of these organizations are also referring that they have collaborated. Others apparently endorse this guidance, and all of that is reason enough for us to dig in and check it out. So we're just going to skip the executive summary and go to the table of contents, which is, I think, rather interesting, because if it always the table of contents tells you about the structure of the document. And just keeping in mind that this whole document has about 30 pages, you will quickly see that there is one major topic that they rub in your face. It's called taxonomy. So CISA refers to that as taxonomy, and it basically consumes almost half of that whole document. And you may find that surprising. Certainly, I was surprised, but not in a bad way, because what they call taxonomy is usually known as context, system context, or metadata. And I think they do a good job of bringing that point home by rubbing it in your face. Well, you must also establish that context, that metadata on various dimensions, and we will go into that. I used to say metadata is the glue that glues asset details to use cases, because if you want to do anything like vulnerability management with your OT asset inventory, you're going to need that context. Otherwise, you will be completely lost. So I like that. What surprises me a little bit, also from in this table of contents, look at the steps to develop an OT asset inventory and taxonomy. That's 3 pages. I think that's a bit suspicious, because it looks like it's a little bit too easy, if you ask me, and we'll get into the details. So they introduce the taxonomies. They tell us about the steps to develop that inventory with the taxonomy, and then they tell us what to do with the inventory. Certainly also something I like, and we will check it out in a second. Then they have some additional details here, like the asset inventory fields, which we will also examine. And then they have examples for taxonomies or metadata or contextual data for various industries. Okay, so let's get down to the heart of it. Introduction. This, in my opinion, stands out, the statement here. An OT asset inventory, an organized, regularly updated list of an organization's OT systems, hardware, and software, is foundational to designing a modern defensible architecture, because without an inventory, organizations do not know what they have and what should be secured and protected. Well, that's absolutely right. So very well put. And I would even go further, certainly, because what some people still have missed is cybersecurity is not the only reason why you even need an OT asset inventory. There are other use cases as well, for example, in engineering, or if you think about obsolescence management, all of those require an OT asset inventory. So let's go further ahead in the document. Certainly, we don't need to mention the acknowledgements. So now they're getting real with the taxonomies. Maintaining an accurate, up-to-date asset inventory is complex. No, it's not complex. Objection, Your Honor. It's not complex, only if you use the wrong tools. So it's a little bit sad, in my opinion, because, I mean, just look at the big picture again. Just 1 or 2 pages later, they give us a 3-page description on how you develop this. And here they say it's complex. But if it's so complex, why would you be done in 3 pages? So I don't know why they put it in here. I would certainly not posit that it's complex. Well, it's easy. If you use the right approach, it's very simple. Then they, so as I read this in this page, they try to sell the idea of why a contextualization is beneficial. So why you really should take the effort and collect all that contextual information. In my opinion, not necessary, because as I told you, just keep in mind metadata, or this contextual data, is the glue that ties your asset details to use cases, to real-world use cases. And that should be reason enough. If you have understood that, you don't need all these hexagons and the cost savings. Certainly, that is usually a stale selling point. It will result in cost savings. Well, probably not, but that is not really an argument I would make here. Okay, but now we're getting real. Okay, steps to develop an OT asset inventory and taxonomy. So this looks like an actionable thing, right? So like a recipe on how to arrive at a contextualized OT asset inventory. They have documented this process as they see it, asset inventory steps, how to build one. Let's just go through this. Define scope and objectives as the first stage. Define governance over asset management, assign roles, define the scope. Okay. That sounds all fine and dandy. However, if you ask me, the essential piece that's missing here is to select the tools that you intend to use. And we will see that throughout the rest of the document. They are pretty much silent about the software tools that you could or should use in order to make it happen. So, and that is, in my opinion, one of the most important steps in this preliminary stage. And basically, real-world organization also approach it this way, because they realize, well, it's going to be tough just using pen and paper. So therefore, we should better decide on which asset management product to use before we start this whole procedure, right? And then usually what happens, you go through proof of concept with 1 or more products. There aren't dozens of these products available, so it's not the most complicated task in the world. And then you select what you want to use, because without such a tool, you will get nowhere. Okay, next step, identify assets and collect attributes. So, okay, now it gets fishy. So hold on to your pants. Conduct a physical inspection and logical survey by gathering detailed digital and network-based information about system components. Compile a comprehensive list of OT assets and network infrastructure dependencies. For real? So this is something that really throws me off, because if in 2025 these government organizations really seem to believe you could discover because this is what we're talking about. It's usually called asset discovery in the industry. You could discover your OT assets by a physical inspection, by a walk-down inspection. No. Impossible. That is totally impossible. It's not going to happen. And let me give you just a couple of examples. Since CISA is referencing oil and gas of one of their industries for which they also build a sample taxonomy, okay? So let's just say you're one of the major oil and gas asset owners in the United States, and you run, let's just say, 3,000 oil wells all over the world. And if you don't know, so some of these oil wells are pretty small. And what you see there is maybe 3 PLCs, a network switch, an HMI, and then some connectivity to the backbone. So are you saying you want to send a poor fellow out to the field just to somehow physically identify those 5 or 7 devices, put that into an Excel spreadsheet or whatnot? So that is your idea of this discovery would work, and obviously it will not work. And so this is not limited to oil and gas. So if you think about manufacturing, on the other hand, you have a completely different problem to deal with. Or let's just say in your manufacturing facility with, let's just say, a dozen machine lines and 20,000, 30,000 OT devices. What do you think how long it is going to take to discover these devices manually by walk-down inspections? It's not going to work. And so this is very strange, in my opinion, that they still in 2025 suggest to do this discovery piece using physical walk-down inspections. That is not going to happen, my friends. So this particular advice is completely off. Okay, then let's go back to the document. Collect asset attributes. These should be included in the inventory as fields. And I skipped this paragraph right here because we're going into more detail later, because they have this whole separate chapter on this topic. And then, so this is like generating the basic OT asset inventory as CISA sees it, okay? And now, as the next step, they suggest to create that taxonomy, or as I would call it, the metadata, the context, the system context. And let's see what they come up with here. First, classify assets according to criticality. Assets are classified based on their importance to the organization's operations, blah, blah, blah. Well, I would imagine that totally makes sense to everyone. However, let me remind you that this sounds much easier than it actually is in real life. And there are a couple of very simple reasons for that. Reason number one would be which nomenclature or which rating system do you use? Like, do you use critical, highly critical, and non-critical, or what, right? Do you use a numeric scale from 1 to 10 or 1 to 3? I don't know. But this is something that you certainly need to define. And not only do you need to define that, the real problem is to make sure that the SMEs who are supposed to actually rate the criticality of a specific device, that they arrive at the same results, which is very, very difficult. And so you're basically alleging that Bob in Idaho, in his plant, will certainly arrive at the same assessment for a given piece of equipment than Jane in California. And this is highly unlikely. So I've said it a couple of times, that concept of asset criticality sounds good on paper, but in reality, it's much more difficult to arrive at meaningful results. And if you're, at the end of the day, if your criticality assessments are all over the place, it really doesn't help you much. So keep that in mind. when thinking about criticality. Then we have the function-based classification. So assets are grouped based on their roles or exposure within the OT environment, such as control systems, blah, blah, blah. So that is, as I see it, basically the type of the device, the hardware type, and we will get back to that later. Then next sub-item here, categorize assets and their communication pathways. Okay, so now we are moving to a different area, if you will, which is networks. And certainly I agree that's very important. So this was like the initial grouping based on criticality and asset type. Now it's about the network context. And they suggest to use the 62443 concept of zones and conduits. I like it. So I think that's a good way to get a grip on network exposure, especially when you think a little bit beyond, like how would you be able to increase the security posture. Just keep in mind, network security is your best bet in OT. Right, so it's like the strongest protective mechanism or technology that you have available, because all these devices are insecure by design, and therefore just developing a contextual framework that will then allow you to tackle network protection, that is certainly a good idea. So we can take that home. Then, or structure and relationships, identify process dependencies. Oh, now it's getting better and better, because, and this basically ties back to the criticality. In OT, a device, an asset, doesn't act in isolation like an atom. Okay, it always acts as part of a system. And if you're unable to understand that system relationship and also how different systems interact, so let's just say in manufacturing, you have a couple of machine lines. You might think they act independently, but wait a second, there is this auxiliary system, this support system, and it's required by all those machine lines for something as trivial as pressured air or something, right? So that is, in my opinion, very astute. That is a very important point. Create detailed documentation to include naming convention, methodology, structure, and deviations. Good. Then validate and visualize. Cross-check collected inventory for accuracy and completeness. Create diagrams to represent asset categories like zones and conduits, blah, blah, blah. Also, I like it. I like what they say, because these dependencies and relationships, if you're unable to visualize them, so if you just have them as items in an Excel table, you will not be able to understand those dependencies. Whereas when you put it in a diagram, oftentimes it gets pretty clear right away. So the diagramming piece as a whole is very important and helpful, and I'm happy that they also pick this up. The one thing that I'm not happy with is when I look at their sample diagram. So to their credit, they also cover things like wastewater plants, okay? And this to me looks like one of the smallest plants in the world. Like, how many devices do we see here? So don't get me wrong, I understand that this is just a conceptual drawing here, right? So it's not meant apparently to represent a real life complex installation. But I have a different point to make. If you consider an installation with, let's just say, 3,000 PLCs or actuators for that matter, okay? How would you be able to visualize that? Also in such a, it looks like almost drawn by paper and pen, right? So this is not going to work. My point is the diagramming is very important, but this is something where you need powerful tools, my friend. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And Visio is not a powerful tool for making that happen. So you would need something, for example, with the capability to zoom in, zoom out, with drill down, etc. So to give you different, to focus on different parts of a particular installation. Next point. Periodically review and update. Yes, certainly. I love it. And this ties back to the to my initial argument, where I said physical walkdown inspection is not going to cut it because it takes way too long. So before you have completed your physical walkdown inspection, there will already have been some modifications. And that would imply that you would constantly do your evergreen OT asset inventory. So you would have to create your own workforce. And trust me, your management is not going to like that idea. They will make the point, well, these guys don't create product, right? So they're just constantly moving around and documenting stuff. That doesn't make us any money. And they would be right, certainly. So bottom line is the renewal, the review and the update certainly is very important, because that is one of the major shortcomings that we presently see. So if you consider just roughly, I would say 90% or a little bit more than 90% of OT asset owners, they use Microsoft Excel as their inventory tool. And you can take any given Excel spreadsheet with those couple of IP addresses, etc., and you will see it's outdated. You know, that Excel table was created 2 years ago by Bob. And then he never touched it again because he was sick and tired of it. And then he left the company and nobody picked up the work. Right, so this is usually what happens. An OT asset inventory that's collected manually will always be out of date, and then it's of limited use. So therefore, that ties back to the problem. Well, first of all, you must be able to automatically discover your OT devices, and then you must also have this renewal strategy. I like the constant update. That is certainly a must-have. It's not like a nice to have, it's a must-have. Manage and collect data. Identify additional asset information sources for each asset, such as integrator arrangements, vendor manuals, and handbooks. I love it. I love it. Those documents usually add a lot of value, especially for those users who don't operate on that particular installation every day. Okay. Now that bears the question: where do you intend to store these documents? Let's just assume you're still working with Microsoft Excel. Oh, I don't know. So that's going to be a stretch, right? However, if you would have an OT asset management system, guess what? You can store those documents right along with the asset, or as we call it in OT base, the asset profile, where you have all the contextual data, and you can attach as many files as you want. And if you click on those icons, it's going to open in your PDF viewer. So it's just a dream come true. But my point here is, guys, you're just circumventing the central question: which tool to use. And if you suggest, and this is a criticism I would have, if you suggest this can be done manually and probably with Office tools, no, this is bad advice. It will not happen. So you need a dedicated tool. In case you wonder which tool would that be. I found it's called OT base. So lifecycle management, also that's also a good point. Define lifecycle stages: acquisition, deployment, commissioning, maintenance, and decommissioning. In OT base, you would also find the lifecycle stage planning, because ideally your whole inventory process will start in the planning stage, which comes also with a lot of benefits, because when planning new systems, well, you can simply just clone existing systems and then just edit the modifications that need to be made. Okay, so we are moving to the next chapter here. So according to CISA, now we have our OT asset inventory done, checked. And now they talk about what you can do with the asset inventory. And again, I like it, right? Because nobody does an asset inventory in its own right. So it's not like, oh, it makes me feel better. No, you do it for a reason. And let's see what they have in mind. So first of all, they talk about cybersecurity and risk management. Makes total sense, obviously. Identify known vulnerabilities, available patches, updates, hardening guidance for vendor systems and applications. Cross-reference inventories with established vulnerability database, such as the KEV catalog, okay? And yes, that's a great idea. However, it will not work the way that you suggested. It will never work. And I'll tell you why. So, if you still think, well, maybe we just put my whole team to work on the asset inventory, right? So we have manually collected all that data, and now we're also doing the same thing, like using the same approach for the vulnerability discovery process or CVE mapping. That is never going to work. Why? For a couple of reasons. First, at this time, there are around 250,000 vulnerabilities that are published, like CVEs, and you have to match them against your installed base. Okay, unfortunately, you have to do that every day because there are changes in that landscape every single day. New vulnerabilities pop up just out of the blue, and then existing vulnerabilities are modified, or the assessment is modified, etc. So you would have to do that every single day. And that means even if you would outsource this task to a Chinese sweatshop, it's not going to work. Without automation, my friends, OT vulnerability management will not work. As simple as that. So, and just to drive the point home, the one very strange omission in that whole CISA document is that they don't really talk about software, talk about Windows software, right? So they talk about operating systems, firmware versions, but they don't really address application software. And that is strange because if you look at all the vulnerabilities that you can find, then you will see that only a handful of vulnerabilities actually are related to hardware products. More than 90% of all CVEs are related to software products. And when I say software products, I mean application software. Certainly, then we also have the operating systems, right? Your outdated Windows versions. But firmware, no, there are vulnerabilities for that too. But the vast majority of CVEs that you see relate to application software. Just as a case in point, Google Chrome, Firefox, right? Microsoft Edge. You will find hundreds of vulnerabilities or CVEs for these products. And if they are out of scope in your asset inventory, because apparently you figured out that there is no way that we will be able to record all this data manually. Certainly you can't. That doesn't work. But if that is out of scope, then your vulnerability management is a lost cause. As simple as that. So I could even go so far and say every CISA advisory that you study, it's a waste of time, because you will only see this tiny little snowflake on the tip of the iceberg, nothing else. All the big ice over the water, under the water, no, that's out of scope for you. So that is not going to work, and therefore this CVE mapping, as it would be the technical problem would be, can only be done using automation. It will not work any other way. So again, I have to say, this is ill advice. And by the way, I realize we are over time, and this will continue for, I don't know, maybe 15 more minutes, because we really have to talk about stuff here. So I'm dedicating more time. If you have to leave, just check out the recording on X, YouTube, or LinkedIn later when you are in the mood. So let's go back to the documents. That doesn't work as they think it could. Implement real-time monitoring. Oh, okay. Now we are getting there. Okay, so it looks like somebody said, maybe the better idea would be to use some kind of automation, some monitoring product. They're absolutely right. It won't work any other way. Then they also talk about maintenance and reliability. I like it, because that would be one area that's beyond cybersecurity. You remember I touched on that earlier. An OT asset inventory, or the usefulness of an OT asset inventory, is not limited to cybersecurity. You will be able to capitalize on it for various other use cases. And one thing that they call out here is spare parts. I like it, absolutely. And certainly the whole use case here with the spare parts management has nothing to do with cybersecurity. It's just about, well, guess what? This equipment might break, and then you have to replace it. And if you don't have any spare parts, you could find yourself in dire straits, especially if that particular product that you intend to replace is no longer sold because it's end of life. And this is what you need an OT asset inventory for, right? To be able to spot that business continuity risk that is inherent here. Okay, performance monitoring and reporting. So now, in my opinion, they also add a couple of less important use cases, and I don't blame them for that. I mean, and any argument you can make for maintaining an OT asset inventory, certainly, why not? No, it doesn't hurt. Okay, now the next chapter that we're going to discuss briefly is their Appendix A, where they list their suggested asset inventory fields. And honestly, I was having a déjà vu moment when I saw that, because guess what? More than 10 years ago, I have actually done a very similar effort. So that was before OT base, okay? And back in the days, we were thinking hard about the best approach, how to raise the security posture, and it all needs to start with an asset inventory, etc. And then I was so naive to assume that, well, maybe just tell asset owners which information they need to record. So this was one part of what was called the Simple Cyber Governance Program, which we had published since, I think, 2014. And guess what? We had a very similar idea by pointing out those basic inventory attributes for hardware, software. Well, guess what? We even had software back in the days, okay? And just to give you an idea, so you see something like hardware vendor, hardware model, hardware version, CPE, hardware type, and all that good stuff, okay? So that goes back to more than a decade ago. And now is also the same for software here. Now you may wonder, well, what happened to that? Because it pretty much follows the same idea as what CISA has been doing now more than 10 years later. And I can tell you exactly what happened with that. We were so naive to assume that now the asset owner would tell their IT department, guys, we need an OT asset inventory. You have your, I don't know, Oracle, and here is a description of the database fields. Now you create a database for us where we can collect all that information about our OT assets, right? So that certainly never happened. It was totally naive. And then based on the experience with that, it led us to realize, well, you got to give them a super polished product. And this is what led to OTBase. So just telling them, you use a database, and then here are the fields, don't worry about anything else. That doesn't do the trick. You really have to go all the way, which is what we did. But again, let's look at their field descriptions just to point out a couple of other things that I believe are interesting. Criticality here, you have it again. Keep in mind, it's not as easy as you think it might be. Then they have this, the asset type. So this puzzles me. So throughout the document, it appears to me like they are always assuming, well, you have to manually set the right asset type. And in reality, that's not really a thing. And I'll tell you why. Because if you use appropriate technology, then your, let's just say your Ethernet IP devices, they will tell you their device type. How cool is that? So you don't need to type it in manually. If you discover, let's just say, a VFD, a PowerFlex, you will not only get the serial number and the installed firmware version, you will even, the PowerFlex will tell you, I'm a VFD. So you don't need to make that determination manually. And I don't know, for some reason, it almost looks like this is lost to them. Then what else do we have with those fields? MAC address, manufacturer. Okay, this is another thing that I find a little bit puzzling. Manufacturer useful for determining known vulnerabilities. Model useful for determining known vulnerabilities. Operating system useful for determining known vulnerabilities. No, guys, you're wrong. That's not useful. Because if you know the manufacturer of a device, I know Rockwell, how would you be able to infer vulnerabilities? I mean, I would assume that most of you are aware of the wide range of products that Rockwell sells, and also of the wide range of firmware versions, etc. So what does that give you for determining vulnerabilities? Nothing, absolutely nothing. Same with model and same with operating system version. So why doesn't that give us anything in respect to operating system version? Because for your Windows operating systems, the security posture, the vulnerabilities that really matter for that particular Windows box, they're not just tied to the operating system. They're also tied to any patches, any security patches that you may or may not have installed. And this is another very strange characteristic of this guidance here. I have nowhere seen the word patch, security patch mentioned. It doesn't exist. Okay, I don't know why, but I think that's an omission. Right? So because how would you be able to do any vulnerability assessment if you have no idea of all the security patches that are installed or missing on a particular Windows box? And I have a hunch that it is omitted because if you consider they believe the discovery process would be manual. Well, there is no way that you could manually collect all the patch data, all the patches that are installed, determine which patches are missing. It's not going to happen. Okay, so what else do we have here? We're almost done with that particular table. Firmware, software version like before, OS version like before, and here. So this is another thing that I find very strange. Description provides additional context about the asset, how it is used, issues it has had, etc. And they think that that's a low priority item. I disagree based on our experience, because what you expect here in the description field, my friends, is a brief description of the function of that particular asset. Let's just say a PLC. What does this thing control? And why is that super important? Well, because otherwise you cannot really make any assumptions about the criticality of the asset and the other ways in which it might be important or not, right? And this is probably a little bit difficult for IT people to understand, because in IT, you are, in many cases, you're able to guess the function and the importance of a device. Like think about a workstation, a desktop PC that sits in HR, in the HR department, okay? And so the responsible user is Karen from HR. And then you have a pretty good idea of what that thing is all about. You can also imagine, well, what happens if it fails, if it's compromised, whatever. But you cannot do the same thing for OT devices. You are totally incapable of guessing the importance and functionality of a given PLC or RTU for that matter, okay? And this is where those individual device descriptions come in, which are usually added by the control engineers that are in charge of those particular devices. So in our experience, a very high priority item. Serial number, also in our experience, a very high priority item, but you will probably not guess why. Well, simply for reconciliation purposes. This is one thing that the CISA guidance, I don't know, should I say ignores or is probably not aware of. When you are talking about larger installations, the reconciliation becomes an issue, because you will need to figure out, well, this particular, let's just keep with the VFD. So this particular PowerFlex, is that the same as the other thing that is recorded elsewhere in another spreadsheet or whatnot, right? Is it the same VFD, or are those different devices? And why and how can you get in that situation? They're very simple, because guess what? Oftentimes in OT, IP addresses are reused, right? So you find hundreds of private networks, something like 192.168.0.0/24, and therefore you can find and will find a device with the same type that reuses the IP address. However, it's in a completely different network, but you're unable to tell, okay? And therefore, additional attributes such as the serial number are super important. And this is one of the data pieces that, for example, OT-Base uses for reconciliation to really establish device identity, which is super important in order to create a useful OT asset inventory. Okay, and that is basically it. I don't go through the sample taxonomies that they provide here, because we are already over time anyway. So I just want to probably to sum up what I have learned when reading this document. So here is what I think. I see a couple of shortcomings in that guidance, and I've actually listed them just right here. So first of all, they assume manual discovery. It's not going to work, friends. You must have a means of automatic asset discovery. They don't mention any tools. Somewhere they point to a database. Put it into a database. Okay. Oh, and also add the manuals, the files, file attachments. How is that supposed to work? So do you really expect me as the asset owner, because this document is for asset owners, to take your list of suggested fields and pass that to our IT department so that they can then build that application for me? Well, I think you can imagine what the response of the IT department will be. They're not going to like the idea. And certainly also your management will not like the idea, because they can quickly figure out, oh, this is going to cost us, I don't know, $500,000 for the initial version 0.1. And they assume manual CVE mapping, which will also never work. if you are engaging in manual CVE mapping, you are just wasting time. And then I see a couple of omissions, conceptual omissions. So just as an example, as I've pointed that out over my monologue here, software applications and patches, there is somehow miraculously missing. So, and this, I think it's rather odd, because you would think that CISA, well, somebody or all those other international government organizations, didn't anybody say, what about Adobe Flash Player? I've heard this, on that podcast by this Ralph guy. That's a big problem. Shouldn't we mention that? Apparently that didn't occur to them, or somewhere in the process it was lost. Or all the issues that come with those software applications, the necessity to constantly update your web browsers. I don't know why this is lost, or why it was omitted. And certainly the security patches, so they're not mentioned in the document, and I don't know why. So because first of all, they are part of the inventory, right? So it's a configuration characteristic, which security patches are installed. Based on that, you can determine which security patches are missing. When you do your vulnerability management, you will be able to see, now let's just say 56 vulnerabilities are gone. I've just kick them out because I applied those patches. So OTBS will show you that automatically. You see that graph going down. What about control system recs, my friends? I don't see them. So in case you didn't know, if you only know, that's a Rockwell PLC. 7056 control logics. That's not good enough. Because in that same rack, you will find somewhere between 0 and 12 I/O cards, network communication adapters, and nothing about those. And I find that very, very strange, to say the least, because once that you're talking about OT, obviously the control system racks are very important. What's connected to those control system racks? The firmware versions of those I/O modules are important, and they're just missing. Then multiple IP addresses, I mentioned that already. In general, network association and network identity, I don't see that mentioned. What do I mean by that? You must be able to see and tell which devices are on one and the same subnet. This is not only important for your network segregation efforts, it's also certainly important for your incident response, etc., because you must then in minutes be able to tell what is on that same network where I see this intrusion. It's absent in CISA's guidance. And finally, field buses, I don't see them mentioned. And so the IT guys, those are networks that don't talk Ethernet and IP, right? So I'm speaking of DeviceNet, ControlNet, Circos, and you could also say legacy networks, and they are very prevalent still in OT. And you can easily find yourself in a situation where you have a vague idea where thousands of those devices are still on those field bus networks. They're outdated, and I would really like to know what they are, because I need to build a replacement strategy rather soon, because I know these products are end of life, so I will not be able to purchase any spare parts from the manufacturer. So that is, if you want to, my criticism on the CISA guidance. And certainly we want to close here on a positive note, because in general, I would say it's a good document. I think it falls short in the details, but the one thing I like, I mentioned that in the beginning, is the heavy emphasis on context. That is a good thing, because that is something that many people don't realize how important that is. And then you could say that they seem to get lost in the details. And the only reason I could see is that probably not enough practitioners have been involved in creating this particular document. And again, so if you want to say, oh, anyhow, so at least they gave me an additional argument for having this discussion with our management that we really need to build that asset inventory, etc. And I even take it a step further, because I can show management the solution, the tool on how to put it all together. Guess what? We have this tool readily available. It is called OT-Base, as you will probably know by now. And the one thing that I would like to briefly point out here, because it has a direct relationship to that CISA guidance, when you look at the inventory in OT-Base, you will see that sidebar to the left, okay, where you have devices, software systems, networks, and locations. And that simply means that OT-Base gives you various views on one and the same inventory. So now here, right now, we're looking at the device inventory. Like all what you see here, every entry is one particular hardware device with its specific configuration, etc. You can see color coding for device types. But then you also have a software inventory. How cool is that? All right, so you see all the installed software products in their particular versions, when the software was last run, how many days since it was last executed. You see the systems. Systems, that is again something like machine lines. Maybe the easiest way to understand what those systems are would be think of ISA 95. And this is another thing that surprised me. I had expected to see ISA 95 referenced in the CISA guidance. And so what this does is simply to map those functional relationships and dependencies between systems and subsystems. And this is super, super important for understanding criticality and how everything works together. Okay, so this is just a product feature of OT-Base. Then you have the network context. And again, interesting enough, this is it's mentioned by the CISA guidance. We also need the network thingy, but they don't go into any detail. And what I pointed out already is you must be able to see which devices are on the same subnet. And in OT-Base, it works like this. So you see like an automatic network topology, and all of those thingies are on that same network. This is an IP list, and again, different device types are color-coded. Okay, so that's all in there. And then finally, the locations, where you would see all the stuff that is in a particular location. And to their credit, the CISA guidance also mentions that. And so that is super, super important. I skipped that earlier because I think it's the easiest one to understand. If you don't know where exactly a device would sit, well, then you have problems, right? So at some point in time, you also want to then do a walk-down inspection if you have to, just in order, for example, to update the firmware or to replace the device. And so this is how this looks like in OT-Base, all that. And also, I think that this is it's a very good example of context, because here you would see, oh, no, this is my whole site. And from there, you can go into different buildings, and from there dive deeper, etc. And you always see right away what's in there, all the devices. You can get additional maps of that building. You can see the system relations and all that good stuff. So like you can really navigate around. This is what context gives you. You can navigate your way if that contextual metadata is maintained properly. Then it's just a dream come true. The other thing that I want to mention here is, before we go, if you want to learn more about our approach to OT asset inventories, and I think, I hope you will find it worthwhile, because again, the one thing that I see lacking with the guidance from CISA is apparently they didn't have a lot of practitioners in their team. Okay, and would just posit that this is something that we can bring to the table, because for the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, we have totally immersed ourselves in that topic. And we have also provided some guidance, which you see here. So if you go to otbase.com/resources, you will see a couple of publications that I urge you to download and digest. For example, there is this OT Asset Inventory Handbook. I think you will benefit from this one. And then we would also have the OT Asset Discovery Handbook. Don't forget, most people fail in that very first stage in discovery because they try to do it manually, or they think falsely that this can be done with a threat detection product that relies on passive sniffing. That is not going to work, my friends. So with those products, you try to infer device identity and configuration by what you are able to pick up on the network. That's not good enough. So if you want to get an idea how this really works with high performance and high fidelity, here is what you can do. Download OT-based discovery. That's the discovery part of our inventory product. And so this is a Windows service that you install on, for example, in your lab environment. And discovery will right away expose the essential configuration details of your devices. And if that really knocks your socks off, you can even take it a step further. You can turn this into awesome Excel tables, if that is what you fancy, right? So usually, why do I say that? So in all seriousness, an Excel spreadsheet only takes you so far when it comes to OT asset inventory, but it is usually the starting point for everybody's OT asset inventory journey. And based on this, we have done a great effort to take you to that next stage by providing means that you can create your Excel-based inventory as you have never seen it before. So what you would do is, so you use that discovery product that I've mentioned earlier that you can download for free from our website. You discover your OT assets, and then you upload the result files to the OT-based snapshot portal. And then you get a result back that will blow your mind. You can see what it looks like down here. All the details. You will never be able to collect those details manually. It's a steal. We charge $1 per device. Vulnerability only costs 5 cents. I mean, how cool is that? And if you still think, no, that's too much, we don't have the budget, well, you can claim a $1,000 promo code, my friend. So if you go to otbase.com, otbase-snapshot-promo-code, you can try to convince our sales team that you are actually eligible by telling us something about your background, what you try to accomplish, what you did before, etc. And that means with that $1,000 promo code, you will be able to easily create a comprehensive OT asset inventory for a couple hundred devices, right? Okay, so I do see we have a bunch of comments and questions here. Let's just quickly go through those. Conduct a physical inspection walk down. Seriously, how did that get through? Yeah, I don't know. I agree there. I have no idea. And you know, the funny part, as I see it, is just to imagine all those other organizations, right, from all those other countries. Why did nobody raise the flag? Guys, I'm not so sure about this. So what else do we have? Dimitri tells us, I'm trying to better understand how OT-Base generates data flow diagrams. Specifically, does OT-Base support the detection and visualization of communication protocols such as blah, 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 blah? Yes, it does, and I'll tell you why in a second. If these protocols are not directly supported, blah, 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 blah. Data flow diagram, certainly that's important, and we we actually create the data flow diagrams. And the way we do it is rather simple. So we don't use passive sniffing. Keep that in mind, right? And this is just for scalability reasons, because we target large enterprises with, I don't know, 100, 150, 200,000 devices, and then you cannot use the passive sniffing approach with the hardware sensor. So we use two sources for the data flow. First, we digest net flow and S flow from switches who are capable of supporting these services. And second, this is actually also a very interesting segue here. So let's go back to the download page. If you go to our download page, you can also download this discovery agent for Windows. And the discovery agent for Windows automatically collects all the data flow it sees, and it generates a fancy Sankey diagram as shown here, okay? If you then upload that to OT-based inventory, should you have a license for that, it's going to draw superb, awesome data flow diagrams. And just by the way, what you can see already here, very, very interesting in my opinion. Well, anything that's in orange, that tells you this is the public internet. Not good, not good. Joe, we got to talk. Public internet exposed, okay? And the funny thing is, so this is usually supposed to collect the data flow that goes to, let's just say, highly critical endpoints, such as an engineering station. However, if you want to, you can also connect this discovery agent to a span port, and then you get all the other traffic, so not limited to one specific endpoint. So I think that's a rather cool solution. Next comment. I have a site visit, boot on the ground and verify physically everything, take note of the new assets and demolished one, do a red line markup, the initial high-level list, yes, and oh, well, the one advice that I have for you, dear LinkedIn user, don't go there without OT-based discovery, because it will go a long way. Dump the results into OT-based snapshot, and then you just bang, just magically within 24 hours, you have your fancy Excel table with all the devices and the vulnerabilities if you want to. So just, I would just suggest experiment with that, and you will most likely be blown away. Use your finding to build a comprehensive wall chart diagram connecting everything, blah, blah, blah. Risk. Yes, but that is something where you would need the real thing. So OT-based inventory. This does all the visualizations, including the charts, like the network topology diagrams, how everything is tied together, the data flow diagrams. That happens in OT-based inventory. Glad to hear the components and fields are better, and some gems mixed in Ralph's commentary. Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Dale. Collect as much information as possible of the assets you have to tabletop review and have initial list. Okay, this seems to be cut off from a sequence. But just picking on that detail here, as much information as possible, I don't agree. Because keep in mind, everything needs to have a purpose, right? So we are not doing that for a self-purpose. It's not a value in its own right to have an inventory with as much information as possible. What I suggest to do is, once that you have your initiative rolling, try to talk with as many different stakeholders as possible, because once that they understand what you're doing, if you're doing it correctly, you will see various different interests, like what I said earlier. So there are use cases beyond cybersecurity where you probably didn't think about. So just to give you an idea, when you remember, I showed you the system relationship, the dependencies, right? And what we have seen with our customers is that all of a sudden, process engineers say, wait, show me more of that. I want to use that. They are not even interested in the whole cybersecurity and asset details firmware thing. They were just interested in the capability of modeling their process dependencies, okay? And At that stage, your OT asset inventory initiative just takes a whole new level of momentum, because then you all of a sudden you enjoy tailwind of other stakeholders that who clearly point out the value that this presents to them, and that's a good situation to be in. Deep dive into each asset, clear scope. Yeah, you can do all of that. Trust me. So, and support and access in an old assets. You will see your new assets, your old assets. You will have everything. How cool is that? So my bottom line is, CISA, thanks for the work, and all the partner organizations. I hope that you take my criticism, which as I see it, was very mild. It could have been much worse, but I chose not to, because in general I think it's a very important effort. You know how it goes. For some organizations, unless the government tells them to do good stuff, they don't listen to third parties or vendors like us. When it comes to the government, okay, let's take a closer look at it. And what you will see is, if you take that too hard, CISA also tells us to do that, you will certainly find, you cannot miss, that the guidance from CISA is not actionable. It cannot be executed because there are these shortcomings in there, which I hope CISA is going to address in an updated version. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about this. If you want to, you can certainly always put additional comments on LinkedIn. That would be the best opportunity, because we will monitor the LinkedIn feed for anything that comes up, and we'll try our best to respond. See you next week. Bye-bye.